We stand by our own, even when the tide turns against us. Clara stood up for a weathered old fisherman when rich yacht owners ridiculed him. Her defiance risked everything she owned. But by sunrise, a massive cruise ship would appear, revealing an extraordinary secret about the quiet man in the corner. Hi everyone, welcome to Tales Unveiled. Let's get started. Clara Matthews wiped down the counter of her Harbor View Café. The small waterfront place had been in her family for 3 generations, and some days she swore she could still hear her grandfather saying, "Keep that counter shining." It's the first thing folks see. The café sat right at the edge of Port Haven's harbor. Inside, the walls were covered with old photographs of fishing boats and weather-beaten captains. The wooden tables were scarred from decades of use. The bell above the door jingled as Jack Harmon shuffled in right on schedule. Every morning at 5:30, before heading out on his trawler, the old fisherman would take his usual corner table and order the same thing, black coffee and toast. At 73, Jack's face was weathered from salt water and sun, his hands permanently curved from decades of hauling nets, wrapped around the coffee mug Clara set in front of him. "Morning, Jack," Clara said, pouring his coffee. "Weather report's good today." Jack nodded, his blue eyes scanning the harbor through the window. "Barometers falling. Storms coming, maybe day after tomorrow." He took a sip of coffee. "They never get it right on those fancy weather apps." Clara smiled. Jack had been predicting weather better than any meteorologist for as long as she could remember. "You need anything else with that toast today?" she asked. "Just butter. Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow." Jack's reply wasn't rude, just straightforward. Through the window, Clara could see Port Haven coming to life. The small coastal town had survived for generations on fishing, but the catches had gotten smaller over the years. Many of the younger people had moved away. Those who stayed clung to their way of life, even as tourism slowly began replacing fishing as the town's main income. The morning passed with the usual parade of regulars. Around noon, the café quieted as the lunch rush ended, leaving only Jack still at his corner table, now on his second cup of coffee. As he scribbled in a small notebook, the bell jingled again, and Clara looked up to see a group unlike her usual customers. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in designer sailing clothes that looked like they'd never seen actual seawater. They carried that unmistakable air of people who were used to getting their way. "Table for 5, the tallest man announced rather than asked, his eyes scanning the café with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Clara gestured to an empty table by the window. "Please make yourselves comfortable." As they settled in, she could hear their conversation. They made no effort to keep their voices down. "Richard, you were right about this place. It's absolutely perfect," one of the women said, smoothing her perfectly highlighted hair. "So authentic. This whole town is just waiting to be discovered." The man called Richard nodded, looking out the window at the harbor. The whole waterfront could be transformed. Imagine high-end shops where those shabby storage buildings are, a proper marina instead of that jumble of docks. Clara approached with menus, trying not to react to their conversation. She'd heard similar talk before. Developers had been eyeing Port Haven for years, attracted by its natural deep harbor and picturesque setting. "Can I get you folks something to drink?" Clara asked, her professional smile firmly in place. "Do you have sparkling water? San Pellegrino?" one of the women asked, barely glancing at Clara. "We have tap water and iced tea," Clara replied evenly. The woman's expression soured slightly. "Iced tea then, I suppose. No sugar." When Clara returned with their drinks, Richard was holding court, his voice carrying throughout the small café. "The Port Haven Yacht Club has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Our members would pump so much money into this economy that the locals would be thanking us within a year. These dying fishing towns never realize what they're sitting on until someone like us shows them the potential." Clara noticed Jack shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He never liked loud talkers. "What's on special today?" Richard asked Clara as she set down their drinks. "Fish chowder and sourdough, caught fresh this morning," she answered. "By him, I suppose?" the second woman said with a laugh, nodding toward Jack. "Hope he washed his hands first." Her companion chuckled. "What's that smell, anyway? Is that him or just the general fishing village aroma?" Clara felt heat rising to her face. Before she could respond, Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Now, Diane, that's part of the charm, the authentic local color." He turned to Clara. "Though once our marina project goes through, we might need to implement some standards. You understand?" Clara tightened her grip on her notepad. "Are you ready to?" "I think we need more time," Richard said, flashing what he clearly thought was a charming smile. "I'm Richard Thornton, Thornton Development Group. You might want to remember that name. It's going to be very important to the future of your little cafe. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." When she passed Jack's table, the old fisherman caught her eye. "Vultures circling," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Clara nodded slightly. Jack had summed it up perfectly. As Clara returned to the counter, she had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything about her town and her understanding of the quiet old man in the corner was about to change dramatically. She was refilling the coffee machine when she heard the conversation at the window table turn ugly. "Hey, old-timer," called one of the men from Richard's group. "What's the biggest fish you've ever caught in that rust bucket out there?" Clara turned to see them looking at Jack, who was ignoring them, focused on his notebook. "I'm talking to you, sea dog," the man persisted. "Or can you not hear over the smell?" Jack finally looked up, his weathered face impassive. "I hear just fine." "Bradley, leave him alone," said one of the women, though she was smiling as she said it. "Oh, come on, I'm just being friendly with the locals," Bradley replied. "Hey, my good man. Does your boat actually float, or does it just sort of absorb water like a sponge?" Jack stood up slowly, gathering his notebook. He placed his usual payment on the table, exact change as always, and headed for the door without responding. "What's wrong? Did I offend the delicate sensibilities of Port Haven's finest?" Bradley called after him, laughing. Clara had enough. She stepped between Jack and the table of visitors. "That man you're mocking has forgotten more about the sea than you'll ever know," she said, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. "He deserves your respect, not your ridicule." The table fell silent, all eyes turning to her in surprise. Richard recovered first, his smile now cold. Well, a little defensive about the local color, aren't we? In Port Haven, we value people for their character, not their wallet size," Clara replied. "Jack has been coming to this cafe for longer than I've been alive, and he'll be welcome here long after you've gone." Richard's expression hardened. "You do realize who you're talking to, don't you? Our development group is about to submit plans that will transform this harbor. Every business owner in town is lining up to make sure they're included in the future we're creating here." He glanced meaningfully around the cafe. "It would be a shame if this charming establishment were left behind when progress comes." Jack had paused by the door, watching the exchange silently. Clara felt a knot forming in her stomach. The cafe was barely staying afloat as it was. A major harbor development that excluded her could be the final blow. But looking at Jack's weathered face, dignified despite the insults, she found her resolve. "If progress means disrespecting people who've given their lives to the sea, then maybe we don't need your kind of progress," she replied. A tense silence filled the cafe. The other customers had stopped eating, watching the confrontation unfold. "I think we've lost our appetite," Richard said finally, standing up. He dropped a $50 bill on the table. "Keep the change. You'll need it." As they filed out, Richard paused at the door. "You've made a serious mistake today. When we present to the town council next week, I'll be sure to mention the unwelcoming atmosphere at Harbor View Cafe." After they left, the cafe remained quiet. Jack approached Clara at the counter. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly. "Not for my sake. I didn't do it just for you," Clara replied. "I did it because they needed to hear it." Jack studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Storm's definitely coming," he said, and Clara wasn't sure if he was talking about the weather anymore. He turned and walked out, the bell jingling behind him. What Clara didn't know was that her simple act of standing up for an old fisherman was about to trigger a chain of events that would shock the entire town of Port Haven. That evening, after closing up, Clara called her mother in Florida, where she'd retired 5 years earlier. "You didn't have to defend old Jack," her mother said after Clara recounted the day's events. "He's weathered worse storms than some rich folks with big mouths." "It wasn't right, Mom. They treated him like he was nothing." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Did I ever tell you about the Atlantic Star incident, the cruise ship that nearly sank in '89? What about it?" "Jack was there," her mother said simply. "But he never talks about it. Never wanted recognition." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Jack? Our Jack? What do you mean he was there?" "Your grandfather said Jack's fishing boat was the first to reach them after they lost power in that hurricane. Made 3 trips through waves that would have swamped most vessels. Saved a lot of lives that day." Clara was stunned. "Because Jack didn't want them to. Said he just did what needed doing. After that though, is when he started keeping to himself more." As Clara hung up the phone, her mind raced with questions. Jack Harmon, the quiet man she'd known all her life, had been hiding something extraordinary. But the true magnitude of his heroism would become clear in just a few short hours. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with lurching ships and towering waves. The next morning, Clara opened the cafe earlier than usual. As she was setting up tables, something caught her eye through the window. The harbor, normally quiet at dawn, seemed unusually busy. Several small boats were motoring about, and she blinked, sure she was seeing things. There was a massive ship anchored in the bay, its white hull gleaming in the early light. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped outside onto the cafe's small deck for a better look. It wasn't just any ship. It was a cruise liner, and a large one at that. The ship's name was visible on the bow, Atlantic Star II. Her heart pounded as the connection hit her. The Atlantic Star II, the successor to the very ship her mother had mentioned last night. Small boats were ferrying people from the cruise ship to the harbor. As they docked, Clara could make out men and women in what appeared to be formal maritime uniforms disembarking, along with passengers in elegant attire. But strangest of all, they weren't heading toward the center of town or the small area designated for tourists. Instead, they were walking directly toward the humble dock where Jack's trawler was tied. Clara felt a lump in her throat as Jack himself appeared on the dock. For the first time in her memory, he wasn't wearing his usual fishing clothes but instead a simple navy blue jacket. Even from a distance, she could see a small ribbon pinned to the lapel. A distinguished man, clearly a high-ranking officer from the cruise ship, approached Jack first. They shook hands as several people took photographs. Clara noticed Richard Thornton and his group watching from their yacht, looking completely baffled. Unable to contain her curiosity, Clara locked the cafe and hurried down to the dock. By the time she arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Jack was surrounded by uniformed officers and elegant passengers, many of whom were taking turns shaking his hand or even hugging him. "Clara," a voice called. She turned to see Martin, the harbor master, making his way toward her. "Martin, what on earth is going on?" she asked. "You didn't know?" Martin looked surprised. "The Atlantic Star II is doing a memorial voyage, retracing the route of the original Atlantic Star that nearly sank 30 years ago. They contacted me last week for special anchoring permission. Said they had a surprise planned. But what does Jack have to do with it?" Martin stared at her. "You really don't know? Jack's the reason half those people are alive today. When the Atlantic Star lost power in the hurricane, every other vessel in the area stayed back. Too dangerous, they said. But Jack took his fishing boat straight into it, made 3 trips to evacuate passengers before the ship went down." Clara's eyes widened as her mother's words from the night before suddenly took on new meaning. "One fishing boat couldn't evacuate an entire cruise ship," she said almost to herself. "Of course not," said a voice behind her. Clara turned to see an elderly woman with elegant silver hair. "But he showed the rescue vessels how to approach safely." The Coast Guard was afraid to get too close because of the rocks and the current. Jack knew these waters better than anyone. Without him guiding them in, they'd have lost everyone instead of just the ship. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she continued, "I was on the ship with my husband. It was our anniversary cruise. When the power went out and the ship started listing, we thought we were going to die. Then this small fishing boat appears out of nowhere in waves that would terrify most sailors." She pointed at Jack. And there he was, steady as a rock, helping people aboard while the sea tried to swallow us all. Never panicked, never hesitated, just kept saying, "Ladies first, and watch your step." Like he was helping people onto a dock on a calm day. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Clara felt her own eyes welling up. All these years, and she'd never known. The quiet man who drank black coffee and ate buttered toast had saved hundreds of lives and never said a word about it. Throughout the morning, more stories emerged as cruise ship passengers and crew mingled with townsfolk at the dock. Jack had repeatedly refused recognition for his role in the rescue, declining medals and rewards. He had simply returned to Port Haven and continued fishing, never speaking of what he had done. By midday, the Harbor View Café was packed with a mixture of cruise ship officers, passengers, and curious locals. Clara had never seen the small establishment so busy. An elderly passenger gripped her hand as she served coffee. "I was on my honeymoon," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "And I were so scared. The ship was listing badly, and the lifeboats on our side couldn't be launched. Then this fishing boat appears, and this man, your Jack, he's standing there solid as a rock while waves crash over the bow. 'Ladies first,' he kept saying, helping people aboard. Never seemed scared at all." Clara looked across the cafe to where Jack sat, still surrounded by well-wishers but looking distinctly uncomfortable with all the attention. The captain of the Atlantic Star II, standing near the counter, turned to Clara. "We've been trying to honor Mr. Harmon for 30 years. He's refused every invitation, every ceremony. When we planned this anniversary voyage, we decided to bring the ceremony to him instead. He's not one for attention," Clara said, wiping away a tear. The captain nodded. "The best heroes rarely are. When we reached out to your harbor master about anchoring here, we had no idea we'd find another person standing up for Jack Harmon." He smiled at her. "That confrontation with the yacht people yesterday is all over town. Seems like defending Jack Harmon is a Port Haven tradition." The door jingled, and Clara looked up to see Richard Thornton and his group enter. They paused, taking in the transformed atmosphere of the cafe and the unexpected crowd. Their earlier arrogance seemed to have vanished, replaced by uncertainty as they realized they'd mocked a man who was now clearly being honored by people far more important than themselves. As the two groups came face to face, the wealthy yacht owners and the cruise ship survivors, Clara wondered how Richard Thornton would handle this unexpected turn of events. Richard's eyes locked with Clara's, his expression unreadable. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence as she would any customer. Throughout the afternoon, Clara noticed the yacht group circulating through the cafe, listening to stories about Jack and the rescue. Their faces showed a mixture of embarrassment and awe as they learned more about the man they'd ridiculed just a day earlier. By evening, when the captain announced they would be hosting a dinner aboard the cruise ship for Jack and other locals, Richard approached Clara at the counter. "I owe you and Mr. Harmon an apology," he said quietly. "We had no idea." "You shouldn't need to know someone's a hero to treat them with basic respect," Clara interrupted. Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. That's a lesson I won't forget." He hesitated. "Our development plans. They'll need to be reconsidered. This town has a heritage worth preserving, not just exploiting." Later that evening, as Clara stood on the deck of the Atlantic Star II beside Jack, looking out over the twinkling lights of Port Haven, she finally asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" she asked. Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Didn't do anything special. Just what needed doing. You saved hundreds of lives. "That's pretty special, Jack. Anyone from Port Haven would have done the same if they'd been there," he insisted. "We know these waters, know what they can do, know how to respect them." He turned to look at her directly. "Like you yesterday, standing up for what's right." "Same thing." Clara wanted to say it wasn't the same at all, but something in Jack's expression stopped her. To him, defending someone from disrespect and risking your life in a hurricane both simply fell under the category of necessary actions. As they returned to shore later that night in one of the ship's launches, Clara noticed the Thornton group watching from their yacht. Their prestigious vessel, which had seemed so impressive yesterday, looked almost toy-like beside the magnificent cruise ship. The next morning, Port Haven woke to a town forever changed, not by development plans, but by the revelation of a hero who had walked among them unrecognized for 30 years. A messenger arrived at the café before opening hours with an envelope addressed to Clara. Inside was a formal invitation to discuss integrating Harbor View Café as a centerpiece of authentic local culture in the new marina development plans, along with a note requesting her assistance in organizing a maritime heritage element to honor Port Haven's fishing traditions. The Atlantic Star 2 departed at noon with a long blast of its horn, a salute to Jack and the town. Jack watched from his usual corner table, his expression unreadable. When the ship had disappeared from view, he stood up, left his exact change on the table, and headed out to his trawler without a word. Some things, at least, wouldn't change. 2 days later, at the town council meeting, Richard Thornton presented a dramatically revised development plan. Gone were the proposals to replace the shabby docks and storage buildings. Instead, he spoke passionately about preserving Port Haven's maritime heritage while carefully enhancing its appeal to visitors. "What we witnessed this week," he told the council members, "was a powerful reminder that the true value of Port Haven isn't in its real estate, but in its people and their con. Our development company would be honored to help preserve that legacy while creating new economic opportunities for the community." Clara, sitting at the back of the meeting hall, caught Jack's eye across the room. The old fisherman gave her the barest hint of a smile. In the months that followed, Port Haven did change, but not in the way originally threatened. The development incorporated the existing structures, maintaining their weathered character while upgrading their functionality. Harbor View Café was expanded slightly but retained its authentic charm. A small maritime museum was established in one of the old storage buildings, chronicling the town's fishing history and connection to the sea. The centerpiece of the museum was a modest display about the Atlantic Star rescue, created despite Jack's protests. It featured a photograph of a much younger Jack Harmon standing on the deck of his fishing boat, waves crashing around him as he helped passengers aboard. The image had been taken by one of the survivors and donated to the museum. Visitors to Port Haven now often asked about the fisherman who saved the cruise ship. Jack steadfastly avoided the attention, continuing his daily routine as if nothing had changed. But sometimes, when young children approached him shyly at his corner table in the café, he would tell them stories about the sea, never about himself, but about the ocean itself, its power and its beauty, its dangers and its gifts. Clara kept a special photograph behind the counter, Jack shaking hands with the captain of the Atlantic Star 2, his weathered face reluctantly accepting the recognition he had avoided for 30 years. Whenever new visitors asked about the image, she would tell them the story of an ordinary fisherman who had done an extraordinary thing, then returned to his simple life without seeking glory. And every morning at 5:30, Jack Harmon would still arrive for his black coffee and toast, forecasting the weather more accurately than any app. His quiet dignity, a constant reminder that true heroes don't always wear uniforms or seek the spotlight. Sometimes they just do what needs doing, then go back to work without saying a word. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen, you won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.